first of all, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us this evening for the official launch of Caroline Aldridge's He Died Waiting book. It's been an interesting 3 months coming, and it's been an absolute pleasure and an honour to be working with you and everyone on this panel. And I'll give you personal introductions in a minute, so thank you so much. So I'm Caroline Bold, and I want to welcome you to Social Work and Social Justice seminar at the University of Essex, and I am the MA course lead in social work and human rights. And obviously this for me is a particular importance in terms of activism and moving the conversation on from awareness to accountability. It's therefore also an honour that this is being co-hosted with the charity Mental Health Time for Action, and it was really kind of Caroline to agree to both of us to co-host this book launch for her. So I hope we've done you proud. Perhaps say yes now before we get through and have to. And
absolutely, thank you
for anything. So it's been great, and it's been absolutely a privilege working with you over this last 3 months, and very much call you a friend. So today, it's He Died Waiting. We know what we're coming into in terms of the type of conversations that we're going to have. So I want to ask us to bear witness tonight to both our current harrowing times and also those awful times that came before. So our job here, or my job here as chairing this panel, is to do the best I can to make this as safe a space as possible for everybody to share our stories, and to bear witness to the fact that we've all joined here from different perspectives and different asks. We start off by saying that there have been too many Tims, far too many Tims. And we hope tonight that in some way we continue and honour the conversations that have come before us. And we call for accountability and change. And it's interesting that I have to say this is probably the one and only time I've actually agreed with Matt Hancock, who mentioned accountability today. We have a real cross-section today of people who are attending. So we've got service users, people who have used service themselves and carers. We have bereaved mums, we have bereaved families, students of social work, medicine, mental health medicine, practitioners out in the field who are working with us every day. We start from the position of no judgment, and we ask purely for conversation.
What? Can they hear us? Can they see us?
Let me check.
There are also leaders. We have MPs with us today and academics across health and social care, but also people who are interested in understanding more about coroner's courts, about the experience of being a mum and meeting the most horrendous thing that can happen, about the balancing in the bit that I took away from your book, Caroline, is that balancing between the personal and the professional, and how we internalize. If I say something, it could just make things worse. And how do we get through these conversations? I'm also keen that we talk about how silencing works and the impact of stigma, and particularly stigma around unexplained death or preventable death, or as some people would call, not a good death. And the silencing, it can be very subtle, but it can also be very, very clearly said and done. And for those who've read the book, you will see Caroline's experiences of that in language, police training, how coroner's courts are set up. But also I want to mention, and I know it will come later in the presentations, about what candor means. What does it mean for professionals to say, do you know what, that wasn't good enough? And what do they expect to happen when they don't say that? So one of the things we want to talk about is, how does it feel to be sitting on the receiving end of a service that just won't say what's blooming obvious? And how does it feel to be part of a service that feels no longer able to say what feels blooming obvious? And from my perspective as well as a social work student educator, how do we prepare students for that real rubber point between what they believe a system should be and then what they experience it? So we do respect this is emotional. We expect that it will be intellectually and gut challenging. We hope it's safe for people. So please do use the chat, and I'm going to make some suggestions about how we can use that chat. We're also going to be available afterwards. We hope to finish around 6:15. If we all wrap up and we've sorted it out, we can leave early, but I dare say I may be ushering you out of my living room. And so what I would like to do is at least promise you that we'll be finished by 6:15, 6:30 at the very latest, if you squeeze my arm and say, let's talk about it. So please use the chat, and afterwards using the hashtag #HeDiedWaiting. We will be available on Twitter to ask questions, and just continue this conversation, because quite frankly, the conversations have been had. We just see ourselves as being a part of continuing that conversation. And so I come on to my favourite part, a little bit of housekeeping and a little bit of suggestions. So what I'm going to ask is, or first of all, let you know, we've got the recording, and the recording after this will be uploaded onto both Caroline's website, and the website links will be in the chat, and also Mental Health Time for Action website. So you're more than welcome to look back. If you also choose to leave today because you feel maybe it's too much or you have something else to do, please feel that you can always download and have a look at that. I've also been asked to download the transcript because sometimes I think viewing is emotionally more challenging. So for those of you who would rather read the conversation, Zoom's transcription is actually really good, but I think it also gets quite challenged with my accent and how sometimes I can speed up. So please be conscious that if you're following a transcript, you might not always get the words, but you'll certainly get very much the gist. So in terms of using the chat, please use it. I'll be downloading the chat, and we will make the chat available. So again, please only share in the chat what you're comfortable to share. And what we're suggesting is we use the chat particularly in one way is functionally. So we have a number of questions in advance, so thank you for those. And so what I'm going to suggest we do is in the chat, when you have another question you'd like to ask, put question followed by your question. Alex, who is my Debbie McGee for this evening, is going to be following those questions, and then we'll come back to those questions later on in the session. We're also going to ask you to take a personal pledge. So part of the point of Caroline's book is very much about that. The thing I came away from, it's very much about positivity, but not in a let's just get on with it way. It's about let's do something about it. As I talk to students, I talk to them about good trouble and only hope that they don't get arrested. And so it's about, what is your pledge for Tim? So hashtag pledge for Tim, and what do you commit to do? You know, keep it to something that you feel that you can share. You might have a personal pledge for Tim, but you also might have something there that you want to share. I will. And finally, I know that another reason that we can be drawn to this event, and one of the reasons I was particularly drawn to this event was, and the book in particular, was the fact that it is personal. This is in the room, it's here. So please, if you feel able and you feel you would like to, you're more than welcome to put remembering and the name of the person you're remembering, and we will honour them in that group. So 3 ways that you can enter chat with us. because I always have been a bit bossy by telling you to put your cameras off and you're muting, is please put your questions in the chat and we will follow through. If you would like to have a personal question that you feel you would rather keep between you and Alex, please click on everyone and change it to Alex. Or certainly if you've got an individual comment that you would like to leave, please know that the presenters will not be looking necessarily at chat until afterwards. So if you want to send Caroline a personal message, go onto the pull down link and click on Caroline Aldridge, and it will message her directly. But she's under strict instructions not to look at the chat. I know, and you already have, I can tell. No, I'm kidding. I'm not kidding. So question, pledge for Tim about a personal commitment that you're going to make, and also remembering. And so after giving you a full run around, final wee plug before I introduce you to our speakers, and shut up. Caroline has very kindly agreed and offered two schemes that for those who are buying her book, the price has been kept at the original price for this meeting. And for those who are buying her book or who have bought the book off the back of perhaps seeing a tweet or would like to contribute, please buy a book, and she has agreed to put £2 of that price, which is huge for us, towards Mental Health Time for Action fundraising. So thank you. The other thing she's offered to do, and I think it's absolutely amazing, is that whole concept of pay forward. So if you would like to buy the book in situ for someone else, please do. And also, if you feel you can't afford the book, please do not think twice to ask, do you have a pay it forward book? Because people are paying it forward, and that is for people just like you who maybe can't afford it. So please do ask. It is sitting there, and it would make someone's day that they knew that you got that book. Caroline herself will talk about future publications to make it more available. That if you're not a paper person, I have to say I'm very much a paper person, so thank you for doing that. So it is really an honour to welcome people that have been people have stalked in a good way on Twitter for a number of years, and to talk about their experiences, but also to honour your book, Caroline. So joining us today in order of people that are going to be speaking is Dr. Sarah Ryan, who is a mother activist, academic and author, and particularly author of Justice for Laughing Boy. And congratulations also on being appointed professor. I think Manchester has robbed you. It rains all the time up there, so you would just come to Essex, that'd be grand. So thank you so much, and congratulations again, honestly, it's so well deserved. I'll come back to you, Caroline, to thank you. Next is Rachel Bannister, who is the chair of Mental Health Time for Action, and she too is a mother activist and a big activist with an incredible dial-phone who gets onto people, and she's going to talk about from her personal experience and also what Mental Health Time for Action and where it came from and where we want to take it to. And last but not least, we've got Claire Skilleter, who is going to lead us through a practice skills session on how we can truly take what we've learned and discussed here forward. And you are leading in practice education, supporting people in terms of their practice development. So, and that's from Norfolk. So again, I really appreciate, Claire, you coming down, and we actually met last year. I think it was a year before, and so it's very important to all of us here about how we can take this forward as a conversation. And I think I said last but not least, but I mean last but not least with Caroline Aldridge. So thank you, for allowing us to do this. Again, mother activist, social worker, academic, an incredible stitcher and craftivist, using your crafts, and behind you is the quilt that you've created and that covers the book as well. So I know that you'll be talking about that. So I think I have said far too much, which is not unusual. And so what I'll do is I will be allowing other people into the room. We currently have now 135 people in the room, so I think that's quite incredible. So thank you so much again. And if I can hand over now to Sarah Ryan.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me to do this introduction. I've actually written down, I've got a script, which I wouldn't usually do, but I don't want to bang on too much. So it's 3 parts I'm going to talk through. So part 1, Tim died waiting. He died waiting for professional support and care that simply doesn't exist, as so many families know. He was clearly kindness, a gentle young man with good intentions, quirky and talented. But before he died, he decided to wear a top hat. I think that's pretty cool, and I've never met Tim, though I think I know him now, having read the book, and I like him a lot. Tim died waiting. I don't know if he knew he was waiting or knew what he was waiting for. His mum Caroline was there on the front line of the parenting front line we join when a child sits outside of what is considered to be normal, on the front line with the paraphernalia us mothers in particular typically have. This includes a catcher's mitt the size of a canyon, tissues, wet wipes, a bit of spit, food, snacks and hugs. A lifetime of hugs. 10 pairs of hands and a list of stuff to do that never gets shorter. A heart filled with so much love, it's almost impossible to imagine. A brain weighed down with facts, information, heart-sink forms and reports, contacts, planning, always thinking, always plotting, stuff that dominates every waking moment, the stuff that keeps us awake at night. Even before our children die in intense fear and bewilderment and nowhere to go to get help. And all the while, Tim and the other Tims waited. Part 2. Writing a memoir is something that people approach in many different ways and do so for different reasons. He Died Waiting is written with the aim of helping social care and health professionals better understand our lives as families. Families with our brilliant, unrecognised, unusual, beautiful children. Caroline's account of family life is so richly textured and detailed, it's painful to read at times. She captures life across generations, the mental health related world of services or non-services that families are catapulted into, often without warning, without support, and left to navigate alone. Her professional role as a social worker deepens this texturing, and she scrutinises practices, including her own, with thoughtfulness, honesty, and a reflexivity that in itself offers social work students and professionals riches. Riches in terms of helping them to become better practitioners, to become human practitioners. It almost goes without saying that this book should be compulsory reading for social work students. A chunk of the book also involves an account of the hell bereaved families are forced to endure after the unexpected death of a loved one who was let down or worse by the NHS, by the police force, by the army. The cruelty of the processes, the uneven playing field, the brutality of coronial processes and investigations, and a seemingly never-ending stream of senior people who are prepared to behave like bastards, regardless of the re-traumatisation of families who have experienced what is considered by any parent to be your worst possible nightmare. And finally, part 3. Throughout the book are one-liners that repeatedly took my breath away when I was reading it. I never asked the questions I could have. I realise now I should have challenged loudly. I should have been more assertive. Instead, I got quieter. Blame is also a strong part of a mother's toolkit, and I know too well the deep sadness that comes from looking back and knowing with that old thing called hindsight that at different points an alternative path could have been taken and things could have been so different, and we wouldn't be sitting here now tonight if that happened. If we'd been louder in our challenging, as Caroline suggests, if we dug deeper, or if we'd simply seen our children clear of the fog generated by the deficit discourses that cloak them from the moment they're identified as having mental health issues or being learning disabled or autistic. What seemed important at the time simply wasn't. What was important was hidden behind professional and impenetrable fatbergs. This book helps other parents and families to see what may be hidden to them, to better understand or keep a focus on what is important, because I think that's too easy to lose in these situations as you're on this treadmill of fear and terror and struggling to understand what to do for the best. As powerfully, Caroline describes how she continued to understand him after his death. Some of his actions became clearer to her and she learnt things she didn't know before. She realised, for example, how while she worried about Tim's safety, his brother and sister would often turn to him as a place of safety for them. I was reminded how Connor's sister Rosie told me after he died how he'd made her feel safe. It's the family love and relationships, the joy and humour that professionals need to recognise way before things approach crisis point. Instead, too often people are atomised, split off from their families and badged as problems. There's a text exchange between Tim and his sister Anna in the book, and it goes, "Yo sis, it's the batty boy here." And Anna texts back, "Hey batty bro, what's up?" This to me captures what's lost in translation between families and professionals in practice. It also illustrates how badly we've gone wrong in terms of understanding how to effectively support young people. Between siblings and within families, that understanding happens and works until the point at which external services need to step in. So, in conclusion, then I would say, if we were together, I would say let's raise a glass to Tim the Burger Lord and his remarkable mum, Caroline, who I will hand over to now. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Now, because I didn't want you looking at me for a long period of time, Caroline Ball's going to put up a PowerPoint with some images. And the first thing I want to say is the images I'm sharing of Tim, I'm asking everyone in the room to respect that they're not for circulation. I made a conscious decision when I wrote the book not to include images, but some people have asked for them, and there's some really lovely ones in there that I'm going to share. So if Caroline puts that up, and my plan is just to take you through just a little bit about why I wrote the book and what I hoped from it, and to do a couple of readings from different parts of it as well. So are we able to get that PowerPoint up, Caroline? Yay. So the first slide, which we'll gloss over, will be there when we circulate them. We've got lots of details then about the book and where you can find me. I hang out on Twitter a lot, and Instagram I'm getting the hang of, and my website and things. So if we move just straight onto the second slide then, Caroline, please. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a bit of a flavour about what the book's about. I think Sarah Ryan has just brilliantly captured that, and I'm not going to repeat that. I just so got the bewilderment when there's nowhere to go to get help. I think I spent decades bewildered as Tim's mum, trying to get the right kind of help. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why I wrote it and what I hope it will achieve. And this image appeared on social media. Our local campaign about mental health services did a march in 2016, I think, and this placard was left in Chapelfield Gardens, if anybody knows where that is. And it made me cry. It made me feel emotional watching it now. It made me cry because, and I talk about it in the book, because I recognise the handwriting, I recognise the spelling, and I think it shows something of the real impact of what happens when you lose a precious person in your family. And I think that as a professional, I know that gets lost. I think that it's too easy to sanitize it as just another death, one of the statistics. And for me, this picture brings alive why it's important and what it really feels like for people. So if we have the next slide, please, Caroline. Okay, now I'm going to just read you the prologue, which is very short. And this really sets out, I guess, a bit about the book and what it's about. Each there's about 70 little mini chapters, and each one I start with an extract from an email or a description of a photograph or something. And so this one starts with an extract of an email that I sent to the CEO and the chairman of the Mental Health Trust just after Timothy died. And this prologue's called Whispered Lives and Whispered Deaths. Do you want to turn the PowerPoint off while I do this, Caroline? Brilliant. Okay. Subject, invitation, Ray Timothy David. Dear sirs, I would like to invite you to my son's funeral. I'm in the uncomfortable and perhaps unique position of being a bereaved parent of a service user and an employee of the trust. Although the exact cause of Tim's death is unknown at the moment, it's clear that he was in acute emotional distress when he died. The mental health services that Tim received have at times been woefully inadequate. I'm not seeking to blame anyone. Tim's situation was complex. He was failed by many organisations and individuals, including myself. At Tim's funeral, I'll be attempting to raise awareness of mental health. I would like to work with you to ensure that any lessons learnt from his death will be applied. I want to help improve services, prevent deaths, and spare other parents the raw agony that I'm going through. Regards, Caroline. This email was sent 5 days after I received the shocking news that my eldest son had died. Tim's death was initially categorised as unexplained. This bland description does not reflect the harrowing circumstances surrounding the end of his life. Tim had a serious mental illness and he died waiting for an appointment. My world imploded when I became a bereaved parent. I did not know if Tim had died of natural causes, by suicide, by accidental overdose, or even as a result of criminal violence. And I was thrust into the incomprehensible and brutal procedures that follow an unexpected death. Intense maternal grief governed my actions, and I was desperate to salvage something positive from Tim's life and death. So I clicked send and crossed a threshold. I shifted from a compliant staff member to a mother challenging the system in the hope of making a difference. It was not a courageous act because I had no concept of the consequences. Tim's life mattered. I will never know precisely how he died, but I am certain that his mental health and the crisis in services were the root cause. Tim was one of the hundreds of unexpected deaths of people known to mental health services in my home county each year, one of thousands across the UK. Year on year, the numbers keep rising, and behind the statistics is a grim reality. Missed opportunities, lives carelessly lost, families devastated, and harsh processes that add to the pain of bereaved families. I've become increasingly aware that the deaths of some people largely go unnoticed. People who have a mental illness or learning disability, those who are dependent on drugs or alcohol, the homeless or the poor, might die prematurely without a thorough investigation. There may not be any formal review by the agencies responsible for the delivery and scrutiny of services. Coroners do not hold inquests for every death. There is a lack of societal curiosity and outrage which mirrors the low value placed on marginalised people. Preventable and predictable deaths occur too often. Deaths in my community, in your community, in care homes, in hospitals, deaths on the street or behind closed doors. Some people are deemed to be of so little worth that their lives and their deaths are mere whispers. After Tim died, I tried to work with the Trust in a balanced and constructive way to learn the lessons from his experiences. Instead of embracing my offer, they behaved in ways I still find hard to believe or understand. Duplicitous actions that compounded my distress. My resilience was tested to the limit, and at times I thought I would break because I could not endure anymore. But I survived. Over the years, I've acclimatised to loss. However, the lack of improvements in mental health services is an unresolved issue that I cannot ignore. It seems as if the whole system is in danger of breaking down across the country. It's not just the high numbers of deaths that concern me. People are living with emotional pain and distress that could be alleviated. Despite my best efforts, I have not made any difference at all, not even the tiniest bit, none. I am guilty of whispering. I was whispering when I should have been shouting. I cannot disregard my conscience. For all the Tims and their families, there are some things that need to be said, some whispers that need to be louder, bold words from the heart that need to be spoken to provoke change. This book aims to serve a broader purpose than a straightforward memoir. Tim's story illustrates wider problems in mental health services. It's a plea for policymakers, organisations, professionals, and the public to exercise compassion, kindness, and decency. But first, I need to briefly step back into my own childhood. In the beginning, there was a girl who would one day become a mother. So if you'd like to put the PowerPoint back up, thank you, Caroline. Where I am. Okay, so we can move on to the next slide. Okay, so here's a lovely picture of Tim that was taken by my brother, who is here. So that made me want to cry. And here's Tim the man, but in the book, and I think Sarah sums it up, I try and get you to know Tim the boy, Tim the very much loved member of a really ordinary, loving family, because he was so judged as an adult. People saw his illness and the behaviours that came from the way he managed his illness, and they lost sight of who he really was and what he stood for. Although his friends, they never lost sight of that. And that's something that really touched me after he died, to work out just how important he was to his friends, not just us as a family. And I describe in the book him never being quite the right kind of ill to get help, and the way that services often offer a non-response. It takes such a lot of energy and effort for people who are unwell to ask for help. And if that's met with a rebuffal or a long wait for an appointment or an assessment that doesn't lead to treatment, it destroys people, and they end up feeling less and less willing to put themselves forward and ask for the help they need. Tim, towards the end of his life, was really quite frightened of services. That what little experience he had left him feeling frightened and not valued. Nobody ever built a relationship with him. And I think that's a key message in my book about the importance of really valuing the people that need services and building relationships so that people do feel safe enough. So Tim was described as difficult to engage, but I counter that actually services are difficult to engage. So with the next slide, please, Caroline. Okay, this is a little, I've got the quilt that I made, that the cover of the book comes from. I made a quilt. Tim was one of 139 people who died in 2014 at just one trust. And I made a quilt, and they're little, it's behind me, they're little 2.5-inch hearts for each person. And you can see us quite we possibly see if I move it right the way to the top. It's quite a big quilt. But that's 139 people who died in just one trust, in just 1 year. And they are the people that count in the death statistics. And it's a bit like the hokey cokey, the way mental health trusts and commissioners and people count deaths in. As services are fragmented and outsourced and criteria change, it's like really impossible to kind of work out exactly how many have died. And I think the numbers that are registered and recognised are the tip of the iceberg. So I kind of, while you're listening to me, I kind of know that these problems are across the country, and I want people to just pause for a moment and think, do you know how many deaths there are where you live? And how do you trust those figures? Where would you get that from? And what would a national quilt for 2020 look like? How big would that quilt be for this year for deaths associated with mental health, just the unexpected deaths? And it's quite sobering, and I think that visual image definitely seems to have helped people kind of think that there's a scale of a huge problem here that's happening in plain sight and nobody really notices. And I think some of that's about wider things to do with society. So we have the next slide, please, Caroline. Okay, so we've said this, there are lots of Tims, and there's a silent army of bereaved relatives. I thought I was the only mother in the world who was dealing with what I was dealing with, and that I must be doing something horribly, horribly wrong. And then Tim died, and my friends and my fellow colleagues found their way to my door to tell me about their children and their struggles, and how all of them felt this was something they couldn't talk about. So the stigma and shame, particularly on mothers, is huge. And I've written the book really for that silent army, because so many of the people who have contacted me since Tim died are frankly too broken to speak out, to say anything. I've been really fortunate. I've got a really loving family and a really good, strong friendship group, and it's lovely to see so many of those people here tonight that are here supporting me, and they've supported me through the worst of times. But a lot of people do not have that level of support, and what happens to bereaved families when someone dies unexpectedly is, as Sarah said, is brutal. It's beyond comprehension. People are confused, they're diminished by grief, and the professionals, they all do this every day. They all go to inquests and socialise together all the time. And I can say all that as a professional who's worked in services. I am a social worker, and I've got absolute respect for my colleagues and the difficult job they do. And I've also supported colleagues who've had to go to inquests when they've lost a patient, and they're in bits and devastated because they cared. So I hope my book is balanced and more nuanced than saying this is all wrong and it's got to change. This is complex, and we all have a part to play. So next slide, please, Caroline. So we've already talked a lot about the learning the lessons. This one really, really gets me. It just makes my blood boil. So, you know, big organisations, they're really fluent in platitudes. They wheel out someone every time something goes wrong, or probably more accurately when they get found out for something going wrong. And they say, oh, you know, so kind of a bit of a one-off. We're committed to learning the lessons. We're already making the changes. This isn't going to happen again. As a mother, it's been heartbreaking watching other mothers and other families go through exactly what we went through, things that I tried to raise and say, you know, this happens and Tim died. And it's like, yeah, we're sorting that. We're not doing it like that anymore. And then you realise actually they are, that I was just fobbed off, really. So I say this in the book. It seems to me that a fundamental problem in improving things is that organisations never in reality seem to learn from their errors. Across health and social care, numerous reports, reviews and investigations make a plethora of recommendations that essentially say the same thing. The findings are found and refound. The promises are made and remade, only for the same mistakes to be repeated. And I think it's time to stop having, I know we've got MPs in the room and service leaders, it's time to stop having all the reviews and the reports. We all know what's wrong. We all know what needs to happen. We actually just need the resources and the heart to make those things happen, to look at the reports that have been written and say, this was recommended and we actually need to do it now. So next slide, please, Caroline. And I've already said that, you know, in my prologue. So this is a plea for us all to think about what we can do. So we move on to the next slide again, so I'm mindful of time. So Caroline's already talked about the pledge for Tim. And really it's a pledge for Tim, but it's not for Tim. It's for your Tim, for Connor. It's for whoever it is that you care about, to think about. We all have a part to play in nurturing and protecting the mental health of those around us. So that might be shouting a bit louder for a service for your loved one. That might be the fact that you give food parcels to someone that you know is in a muddle. It might be that you're going to go away from this, I would hope, if you're in a position of influence, to think about what could be better, what could make your organisation, what could actually do to make a better culture, a more positive culture, or more humane services, or to think about how you deliver things and how you could do that better. So it's about committing to things that are realistic and doable. I'm not really impressed by the grand gestures of we're going to completely change, you know, we're going to completely change our service, it's all going to be wonderful, we're going to restructure it. Yeah, I've heard it all before. I'd much rather hear something specific, like we're going to do this one small thing in our part of our service. We're not going to employ any more people that aren't working with service users to look at what the problem is. We're actually going to employ people to work with the people who need help. Something really tangible, if that's within your gift. So next slide, please, Caroline. So essentially my book, I think it is sad, but it's a love story, really. I think it's not about all about negativity, and I hope that it brings ideas and positivity and balance. And this is what I say in the book. The intensity of my love for Tim correlates to the pain of my grief. My love of and for my family has kept me strong. I feel a sense of love for my fellow humans. I empathise with them and react emotionally to their pain and loss. It is this love that underpins my passion for practice and social justice. In the end, what matters most is love. Next slide, please, Caroline. So I'm just about to read a bit from about halfway through the book about quilts. You've already picked up I'm quite crafty and I like making things, and that's my soothing. These two images are from Tim's quilt that I don't have anymore. And it was made for him, and I'm now going to, you turn the PowerPoint off for a moment, Caroline, or minimise it. I'll read a little bit for you. So this little chapter is called Quilts, and it starts with the description of a photograph. Woman sewing. A middle-aged woman sits in an armchair. She's wearing a dressing gown. In her hands is a part-finished quilt. Her lips are pressed together as she concentrates on stitching. One thing that helped soothe me and manage my feelings was sewing. I've always been creative and used textile crafting as a way of relaxing. After Tim died, I went into a sewing frenzy. I quilted my way through the pain and the loss. I had clothes that belonged to Tim from his babyhood, the special things that I'd kept in case I had grandchildren, the flannelette nightgown he wore on the day of his birth, his first pyjamas, some splendid red striped dungarees and baby bedding. I also had things that I'd made him during his childhood, such as snazzy waistcoats. I did not have his quilt anymore, but I had the fabric leftovers. When Alfie was eventually able to retrieve the things from Tim's flat, he brought home a random selection of his clothes. He knew that at some point I would make a memory quilt. Once I got going, I kept on sewing. I made a whole series of them for the people who loved Tim. There was something therapeutic about laundering Tim's things, smoothing fabrics with my hands, folding, touching, smelling. For a while I could not bear to cut into the clothes. The first time I took the scissors to one of his shirts, I sobbed. I wept a little each time I sliced into something. Then the creative process took over. My thoughts were preoccupied with overcoming the technical challenges that are inherent with making quilts from unlikely materials. The repetitive movements soothed, choosing, stitching, joining. I would think about Tim and the person who would receive the gift. My nearest and dearest joined me in my sewing room sometimes. Usually they sat alongside me, silently offering their comfort. Occasionally they joined in. Alfie and Charlie both made splendid quilts. Even Anna, who hates sewing, had a go. My friends came on sewing play dates, and we companionably chatted about Tim, about life, about difficult topics. We also laughed and had fun. They all recognised that through sewing, I found some peace. The first quilt I made was for Tim's father. It contained fabrics from throughout Tim's life, snippets from his t-shirts, jumpers, jeans and coats, fragments associated with precious memories. For his girlfriend, I cut hearts from his adult clothing and appliqued them onto a curtain from his flat. Charlie wanted quilts made from Tim's jeans, and Anna wanted snuggly comforters. I thought about ways of communicating to each recipient something of their relationship with Tim. The quilts became tangible reminders. They connected Tim's loved ones together. We each have pieces that represent parts of his life. They contain many of the same elements, but they're different. Making them was therapeutic for me, but it also enabled me to share stories of Tim in a non-verbal way. I cut and sewed some more. I saved the most poignant remnants for myself. I made my memory quilt last. Technically, it's compromised. Artistically, it's limited. Emotionally, it's perfect. It's simply squares from Tim's clothes, the bits with most meaning. The embroidered ducks from a baby garment, the Star Wars logo from a t-shirt, the worn knee of his jeans, a paint-spattered piece of shirt, pieces of his school uniform, leftover name tapes from childhood, part of a faded striped jumper, and so on. The different fabrics are tactile. I can run my fingers over them and they evoke memories, good memories. It's sensory bliss that takes me to happy places in my mind. I've used the metaphor of quilts many times. Tim's life and my relationship with him can be explained using the analogy of his quilt. My love went into every stitch. I had carefully chosen fabrics that mirror his life. Bright bits and bold bits, colours and crazy patterns, some lights, some darks and some sparkle. Not all the pieces were attractive. Nevertheless, it was a beautiful gift that brought him warmth, a reminder of my love for him. Tim snuggled under it when the power went out. He wore it like a warrior. Maybe it lessened his fears. Hopefully it was comforting and soothing when his anxieties were overwhelming. His fingers must have worried at the threads of the embroidered words on it. Frayed threads that say, for Tim, love mum, kiss kiss. All I have now are the photographs of this wonderful creation. So if you could put the PowerPoint back on, Caroline, I'll try and stop being too emotional. Just have a breath. And the point of that, 2 points why I chose that tonight is one, because I firmly believe there are things we could do to help bereaved people, and they don't necessarily cost money. You know, lots of projects where people just are able to make things, do things, reflect and honour the person they've lost can be hugely therapeutic, and it's a real gap. So that's kind of that, and also just to kind of bring it alive to those people that are responsible for services that are listening, just what the impact of that loss is. I think that gets forgotten in the everyday spreadsheets and audits and meetings and boards and subgroups and working parties. Actually, what I'm talking about in my book is real lives and the impact on people. So over the next slide, we're nearly there for my bit. Okay, so in the prologue, I honestly started writing the book because I didn't feel I'd made any difference at all. I'd tried all sorts of different strategies and not made any difference. But actually, in the just few weeks that the book's been beginning to sort of surface, it is making a difference. I've had countless messages from people who are trying to get help for their loved one to keep them alive, or people who've been bereaved. And I thank every single one of them for sharing their stories, for reaching out. And I'm honoured that people have shared what they've shared, but the scale of the loss and distress and confusion is huge. And all the professionals in the room need to really take a bit of a think about what we do to look after bereaved people better. and Mental Health Time for Action, who I'm really delighted have sort of taken me under their wing. I'm already talking with them about how we can set up a Facebook network, so that all the people that say, I'd really like to keep connected to you, I'm trying to do this, or where do I go for that? We've got some way of connecting organisations and people that are interested. So that's really exciting, and it's a watch this space. I've been really heartened by the mental trusts that have been interested in learning from the book, from the lived experience, and thinking about what they do with their students and practitioners. For some reason, it's really popular in Scotland. So hello, all the Scots that are here. Thank you. And I am really pleased that the trust in the book have ordered some books for their preceptorship nurses and are talking to me about how I can be involved in the future in delivering some training for them. And I think that for me is really exciting. I am a social work lecturer. I really am passionate about what students being our leaders and practitioners of tomorrow. So I'm excited about that. And as academics, some universities have taken it under the wing, and I'd really like to see it on every reading list. As a social work lecturer, blimey, I would love this book, as it's got so much in it. So yeah, any of you that have contacts there and know how to do that thing, that's great. And there will be some webinars and things to be supported that are being planned and thought about. So we have I think it's probably the next to last slide. Yeah, so it's a watch this space. So there's only one of me. I've got limited time and energy. So at the moment, I'm just listening to everybody's feedback and ideas and requests, and I'm not committing to anything. And I'm just thinking about how I might most effectively use my time. But I am thinking about developing some learning tools, and Claire Skilleton, my colleague and friend, is talking to you in a minute about how to use them. And I've got postcards, and she's been using them with students, and she's developed a free resource that anybody here today can download and have and take away and use. And I am planning companion books. They're quite a way down the line. You know, I've got a lot of things going on at the moment, but I have got ideas that are coming. And He Died Waiting goes on Kindle from March the 19th. That's really important in terms of making it a bit more affordable, and particularly with lots of people working virtually and needing to use electronic versions, but also for the international people. I've had quite a lot of interest from abroad, but it's really complicated posting books and things, heavy books abroad. So Kindle will open that world up. And since I wrote the book, I started a doctorate, and my research is on the experiences of bereaved parents and how they experience those organisational processes and responses. So I think I'm going to be talking these conversations and finding more stuff out, and I'm not going away. I was whispering, but boy, oh boy, am I shouting now. Next slide, please, Caroline. Okay, so this is just my thank you. It was just, I nearly cried at the beginning of this when I started seeing all the names coming in. Too many of you to thank, but people from my personal life, people who helped me learn to write, people who've hosted the launch, it's just across the board. So many supporters, but lots of people I've met on Twitter who've become friends, and then my friends and family. You've just, every single one person that's supported and encouraged me to get to this point has played an important part, because I've needed a lot of pushing. A lot of times I've thought, I'm not sure if I'm brave enough to do this. So thank you to all of them, and obviously especially to a Mental Health Time for Action and the University of Essex and the speakers today, because I would never have organised a launch. I could only think about nibbles and wine somewhere, and that wasn't possible because of lockdown. And I'm just really grateful. So I think that's me done. I've probably got another slide that will go out with got like my contact details and things on. Yeah, there we go. So it's over now to Rachel Bannister, who I've mentioned from Mental Health Time for Action.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Caroline. That was incredible, incredibly moving. Anyway, when my daughter was first sent many miles from home for mental health treatment, I had no idea that this would be the first of many admissions. I had no idea that each time she became ill, we would face an uphill battle to get her the right treatment, that the lack of continuity of care and lack of consistency in treatment would lead to an admission that nearly cost her her life. When I began to read Caroline's book, I was immediately struck by the very many similarities in our experiences. So much of what Caroline has endured resonates with me and my journey as a mother and carer through mental health services. The reality of being voiceless, the guilt at having whispered when we should have shouted. And yet when we did shout out in desperation, in fear, our cries fell on deaf ears. Our fear was misunderstood or trivialised, and too often pathologised, too often turned into the mother blaming, as Caroline herself has documented. The only thing that separates myself and Caroline's story is luck. And what a terrible indictment of our mental health services, the brutal reality that too often survival is a matter of chance. For myself and my daughter, it was a conversation with an NHS commissioner, a human being with true compassion and empathy. She had a daughter an identical age to mine. It was her, that conversation, that undoubtedly saved my daughter from becoming another statistic. Not only did she listen to me, but she validated my concerns, and without hesitation, she took decisive action. Without her intervention, I have no doubt that my daughter would not have survived her last hospital admission. It was an admission that had wrenched her from the heart of our family and over 300 miles from home. An admission to hospital where within weeks staffing had been halved and consequently self-harm and other maladaptive behaviour had become rife. We were undoubtedly extraordinarily lucky. When you first encounter services, and despite the struggle to navigate the barriers and overcome the obstacles to care, most of us, like Caroline, remain trusting in the system. We wait patiently. We believe that somehow help will materialise. We're cautious about raising concerns and asking for more than is offered. We are so often patient individuals, people who are not used to complaining. Having perhaps experienced great care for our physical health, we truly believe that similar care will be offered to our loved ones struggling with their mental health. When that doesn't materialise, and in Caroline's case, huge mistakes are made, we expect, naively it seems, that those in positions of power will want to learn lessons and engage with sincerity and integrity with those of us who've been wronged. For those who don't know, duty of candour is a statutory legal duty that has been in place since 2014 and requires services by law to be open and honest with patients or their families when something goes wrong that appears to have caused or could lead to significant harm in the future. Within days of losing her son Tim, Caroline reached out to the Trust and offered her help to ensure lessons were learnt to prevent further deaths, to spare other families the raw agony that I am going through. Yet her pleas have up to now fallen on deaf ears. How can we expect change? How can we ensure change unless we listen, engage with and learn from those who have experienced the most catastrophic and tragic consequences at the hands of services? Ask anyone who has suffered the loss of a relative under mental health services, and many will describe how their suffering and agony has been compounded by an absence of accountability. An acceptance of wrongdoing alongside a genuine apology and assurance that the same mistakes will not be repeated. Where is the duty of candour? Caroline, like so many of us, are truly tired of the rhetoric, the meaningless phrase, lessons learnt. We are desperately in need of action. We are delighted that Caroline has chosen our charity, the Mental Health Time for Action Foundation, to host this launch this evening. We believe strongly in the power of collectivism and collaborative action. So many of us have experienced the devastating consequences of a disjointed and underfunded mental health system, and are understandably angry. Many of you here tonight will be sharing those feelings of anger. But in the words of Elizabeth Anion Wu, Professor Emeritus of Nursing, anger creates energy. Let us join together. Together we can use this energy to fuel our activism and ensure we see the change that is so desperately needed. Our charity works closely with Keep Our NHS Public and believes it is crucial to fight for an end to the creeping privatisation and ongoing cuts to our NHS at all levels. There can be no place for the profit motive in healthcare. The only beneficiaries of my daughter's disjointed and chaotic care have been private providers, such as the Hunter Coombe Group. We also cannot ignore the reality laid bare during the current crisis of the gross inequality in our society. A decade of austerity has created misery and devastation for the most vulnerable in our society. We must cease to lay the blame for those suffering mental illness solely on the individual and work towards ensuring we have a humane welfare system, decent housing, alongside easily accessible, free at the point of use, mental health and social care services. It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. Jiddu Krishnamurti. As Caroline puts out in her book, the idea of society making us sick is not a new one, and this has been acknowledged for some time by politicians. In fact, the 1975 government white paper on better services for the mentally ill posed the question: are we in fact living in a society which is positively giving rise to mental ill health? Health cannot be separated from politics. Our charity also campaigns for early intervention within the community that includes access to evidence-based trauma therapies, such as EMDR and parts of child therapy. These therapies have been invaluable in my personal recovery and that of my family. When patients require more intensive care, an ideal model is a step-up service culminating in good quality NHS inpatient care that isn't located an inaccessible distance away from an individual's home and community. Prior to an inpatient stay, some trusts have developed early intervention services which offer intensive support during the day for as many hours as are needed, facilitating the individual to continue to live at home amidst the support of family and community. One example of this is the Rural-Free Eating Disorders Service, which has demonstrated excellent outcomes with such an approach. Additionally, there must be provision for step-down rehabilitation on discharge to enable parents to adjust to life outside hospital. Tim, like so many, never received the care and treatment he needed when he needed it. As Caroline says, he was never the right kind of ill. There was an absence of continuity of care and therefore little chance for him to build up the necessary, trusting, therapeutic relationships that are so crucial to recovery. I truly believe there is so much that can be learned from Caroline's story, so much we could all do as individuals. As Caroline has said, the situation is not hopeless. There are things we can do. If everybody commits to doing their own tiny bit, things could change. If we take just one thing from Caroline's writing, for me, it has to be the fundamental importance of kindness. Looking back at our journey, those that made most of an impact on my daughter and our family are those that reached out with kindness and compassion. The nurse who hugged my daughter during the long nights many miles from home. The GP who put his hand on my arm, looked me in the eye and truly empathised with my pain. It is not always the words said that we remember, but how an individual made us feel. So I'll end today with two of my pledges for Tim. Firstly, a pledge of kindness. I pledge to be mindful of my everyday interactions with others and do my utmost to model kindness, encourage kindness and celebrate kindness, whether in my role as a school teacher, parent, friend or activist. I would also like to highlight the importance of acknowledging mistakes and wrongdoing. I therefore pledge to apologise and take ownership of my mistakes. Let us today take the opportunity Caroline has given us through her writing and move forward together with hope, optimism and determination. Hope is the flame that burns in our soul and tells us that there is a world to win. Len McCluskey. And in the words of philosopher and linguist Noam Chomsky, optimism is a strategy for making a better future, because unless you believe that the future can be better, it is unlikely you will step up and take responsibility for making it so. And if I could just quickly, because I know we're running out of time, is encourage you all to make one positive step forward, and that's to go onto our website, find the page with the fundraising link, and donate if you can, share with all your social networks. We've got quite an ambitious target of £42,000. We want to raise that money to have a real and tangible benefit for people that are struggling to find the sorts of therapies that has kept my eldest daughter out of hospital and has without a shadow of a doubt saved my life. So we're raising £42,000. That will go to fund trauma resolution therapies, including EMDR, parts in a child therapy, art therapy. And we will commission that through another charity called Amara. So if you're able to do that, that would be brilliant. And also join our Facebook support network. We're just getting that up and running. So it'd be great to continue the conversation there. I think hopefully we can put the link to that in the chat, Alex, before the end of the session. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Caroline. If I could come on to Claire.
Thank you, Caroline.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you. Sarah, Caroline and Rachel, I'm humbled to follow you, and you are an impossible act. You are impossible acts to follow. But nevertheless, we'll have a go. I think you're going to do the slides for me, Caroline, aren't you? So my name is Claire, and I'm a social worker, I'm a mother, and I currently work as a practice education lead in a local authority, and my role is to support the learning and development of social work students and qualified practitioners. And I'm really honoured to be asked to be here tonight to help launch this really important book. When I read the book, like many of you, I'm sure, I experienced a range of emotions, but I kept coming back to themes of value-based practice, compassion, speaking out, the importance of reflection and self-awareness for us all. And I really wanted to use the book to support reflection and learning in a value-based way with students and practitioners that I work with. And as such, I developed 2 reflective learning activities, which we're briefly going to highlight for you tonight. Next slide, Caroline, please. So I think that He Died Waiting has a really important role to play in supporting the learning and development, and importantly reflective practice across both health and social care. The 2 activities that we're going to briefly show you tonight are a structured way of using He Died Waiting, one by using an extract from the book and the other by using 5 of the postcards. The activities that I'm going to share are primarily aimed at practice educators, mentors, team leaders and tutors to use with students and practitioners. However, they are easily adaptable for anyone to use. For example, the reflective questions posed in both the learning activities could be used by people who use services or carers as ways to challenge or be curious about the thinking of the practitioners that they may be receiving services from. The activities are also really helpful for leaders and policymakers because the reflective questions that the activities pose are helpful for self-reflection and almost a self-check activity. Next slide, Caroline, thank you. So there are a set of absolutely beautiful postcards, 8 in the set, and they're available to buy on Caroline's website. You've got the link on the slide, and each one of the postcards has a really powerful quote on it from the book. Excitingly, there's a second set of postcards on the way, so I suspect there will be more learning resources linked to those postcards in the future. But currently 5 out of the 8 postcards are used in the postcard learning activity. And the instructions for the learning activity are available free on Caroline's website, and they're in one of the blog posts called Values-Based Practice, using the book He Died Waiting as a learning tool. The activities are mapped to the Professional Capabilities Framework for Social Workers and the Nursing and Midwifery Council Code, but they could easily be adapted and mapped to other professional standards as well. Next slide, please. So there are lots of ways that you could use the postcards and the postcard activity that I'm going to briefly talk you through. So you could use it in one-to-one supervision, group supervision, team meetings, or for individual reflection. And each of the 5 postcards in the learning activity has a series of reflective prompt questions, which are designed to prompt discussion, prompt reflection, prompt self-awareness and learning. In my experience, the postcard activity can be undertaken really successfully at the start or the end of a teaching session, the start or the end of a team meeting, or supervisions or workshops. Next slide, please, Caroline. So let's look at just one of the cards in the postcard activity. As I said, there are 5 that we've created in the activity set. I'm going to read the quote from the postcard, followed by the reflective prompt questions. And for each of you, whatever role you're in, as I speak, I invite you to quietly consider the questions in relation to your own role, your own practice, or your own experience. Some people are deemed to be of so little worth that their lives and their deaths are mere whispers. But his whispered life echoes loudly in the hearts of those who loved him. Reflecting on that quote, can I ask you to just quietly think, how can you speak loudly for patients or service users who you work with? How do you, or could you, support people who use services to speak loudly? Can you think of an example in your placement, your work setting, your organisation, or your life where you have spoken up or you've supported someone else to speak up? How could you do more? I'm just going to let you sit with that for a few seconds. And we'll go on to the next slide, Caroline, please. So that was just a taster of one of the postcards with its reflective learning questions. The other reflective questions on the other postcards, as I said, are available on Caroline's website, so the 5 reflective sets. The second free learning activity is linked to one of the chapters in the book. So we have the postcards and the chapter activities, both free on the website, the postcard activity and the chapter activity. In order to undertake the chapter activity, Caroline has generously granted free access to this particular chapter on her website. So this learning activity consists of the student, the learner, the individual reading the chapter Ignorance is Bliss. In this chapter, Caroline describes her family background and the things that influenced the way she grew up to understand mental illness. Having read the chapter, the students enter into a discussion based on the range of reflective prompt questions that are in the learning activity. And those questions are really designed to develop self-awareness around the way that our family scripts, our upbringing, our values, our attitudes, and our assumptions may impact the way that we work with, talk with, think about, and write about people who are experiencing mental illness. I did this chapter activity a few days ago, actually, with a small group of social work students, a few of whom are here tonight, I think, just for an hour. But I was really struck by their honesty and their reflections on their own upbringings and their life experiences and the way that those influenced their practice. And I wondered whether the really honest, accessible way in which Caroline writes so openly about her life, and in this chapter, the influence of her own early experiences, really helped those students to connect more readily with their own. I think one of the things that the book really does well is models the practice and the thinking that we really want to see in each other and our colleagues. So time doesn't allow us to go through the chapter activity tonight, but please do visit the website, because you can download the relevant chapter and the reflective prompt questions. And as I say, with a small group of students, that could be an hour's activity, hour and a half, possibly. So next slide, please. So my little slot today was to introduce you to the fact that there are learning activities available on the website, and that you can use He Died Waiting as a learning resource, hopefully to change practice. There are lots of other learning ideas that are coming up, so do keep your eye on the website. I have known Caroline a long time as a colleague and a friend. She's a very creative ideas person. She has webinars planned. There will be more blog posts, more resources, I'm sure, so do keep looking out for those. Caroline's also a really good listener. So if, like me, you've got ideas about how you could use He Died Waiting for learning, please let her know. The email address is on this slide. Next slide, please. At the end of the postcard activity and the chapter activity, I ask each student or learner to make a pledge for Tim. Caroline's pledge for Tim, as you probably know, is to speak out. To remind you, we invite you to make a pledge for Tim. Post it on Twitter, Instagram, or the Padlet wall to inspire others. Next slide, please, Caroline. And so finally, my pledge for Tim. My pledge for Tim is to keep promoting and modelling kind, compassionate social work with all of my student groups, and to always think about the person behind the words. Thank you very much for having me, and I'll pass back to Caroline Bold.
So, gosh, how do you begin to follow that? So we've had a number of questions come through, and thank you so much for everybody using the chat. I will save the chat, and I know that we'll all go through your messages, but you know, my quick glance is so much support and love and care. And one of the questions that have come up, and please, some of the questions, there aren't answers, but there's certainly questions that certainly need talk through. And one of them comes from Julia Hopper, herself a bereaved mum. And what do you do about it when no psych will listen or even respond to me? And perhaps if I include one other question, also from, this one's from, sorry, Richard. What changes in services to ensure people are seen and supported? So from Julia, what do I do when people don't listen or even respond? And also then from Richard, what has been the changes in services to ensure people are seen and supported? So perhaps if I can put that to you, Caroline.
They're brilliant questions, and they're questions I've probably spent the last 20 years trying to work out what the answer is, and there is no easy answer. Getting listened to is fundamentally something that I hear over and over again. As a social worker, as a professional, I have to say it's too easy for professionals to not listen to mothers, particularly because of all the mother blaming, and to families and friends who are the ones who are actually picking up the care, because they'll be there when the threshold no longer is met, a discharge, you know, job done, tick the box, off they go. And I think we must listen more. So for the professionals here, I'd say you have to start listening more. And if you've got angry mothers, demanding families, wives, parents, whatever, children, it's because they're fearful for what's going to happen for their child. And I think we also need to be easy on ourselves. I bitterly regret, the one thing I bitterly regret is not fighting harder and louder for the help that Tim needed. But also I can be kind to myself and know that the power imbalance is huge. We don't like to make a fuss. And actually, sometimes when we make a fuss, it's counterproductive because you start getting labelled as a difficult patient or a difficult parent. So I think it's about persistently keeping going in whatever way works for you, and being kind to yourself if your way doesn't work, and know that it's not you, it's a broken system. And perhaps to try and enlist people, you know, Claire was talking about how do we speak louder? If you're in a position where you don't feel able to challenge, try and find someone who might help you. And actually, for all of us here, maybe be more prepared to be that advocate for somebody else. Maybe when somebody says, I need this, I can't get this, to be prepared to take the time and the effort to say, I'll come with you, I'll help you write a letter, whatever it takes, so that it doesn't all fall on the desperate person that's trying to keep their loved one alive. And the other question, I couldn't hear you properly, Caroline, but it was about how do we know if services have improved, was it?
Yeah, and how do we know we're being seen and supported? So I suppose you've probably addressed both questions.
Yeah, I mean, how do we know people are getting? How will we know? We'll know when the death rates come down. We'll know when the number of the referrals going in start dropping. We'll know when GPs aren't constantly saying, where is the help for my patient? We'll know these things, not by the words, not by eloquent platitudes, but by when people start to feel that services are safe and accessible, and that communities know that. So one of the things I feel like in our communities, we've had so much loss and it's not honoured, it's not noted, and it's left a lot of people feeling very disheartened by mental health services. And they'll say to me things like, well, there's no point making a referral, you know, because I won't get heard. And actually we've got to change that, and changing that is about I actually firmly believe we need to stop and go, do you know what, this has been appalling, we've lost too many people and we care about those people, and we are going to listen to our communities. And if our communities are asking for a walk-in centre, or our communities are asking for more psychiatrists so they can see the people to review their medication, then how are we going to meet that need? How are the resources that services have got how's that money going to be carved up so that it's not wasted and it goes to where the need is most? Probably waffled there, but there you go, I'm on the bandwagon.
Not at all. There's no, I mean, I think that was shouty bandwagon, which is absolutely fine. And you know, everything you're saying seems so common sense. And I think, so what is stopping us moving this forward? One of the things I wanted to mention with us tonight are people in Essex who are campaigning, mums in Essex and families who are campaigning and strongly campaigning, and certainly we'd like to continue that conversation. So please do look up at the chat yourselves and look at Matthew's campaign and join that discussion and join that shouty. And I think, you know, let's do some good trouble. Obviously don't get arrested, but hey. So to close with another question, and I think this is broader, so do have a look at Matthew's campaign. And this comes from Ian, and it's one of those, as an educator, as a social work student educator, you know, you almost assume that being downright nosy and going into the area where you help people. What he's asking, how do you instill curiosity in mental health workers so that they truly, as far as they can, understand how someone is feeling, how at risk or not they might be, rather than being just too willing to accept the first thing that they're told? you know, so perhaps to everyone in the group, what, you know, maybe one thing you would expect people to take away, how do you instill that curiosity? So perhaps, Sarah, how do you think we could make sure that the current colleagues and future colleagues can be that curious?
I think it still all boils down to mingling myself. I think students should be out and about, mixing with different groups of people, and the more you mix with people, the more you realise they're human, and the more you refuse to accept what you see when you don't mingle and you just have assumptions. So mingling.
Absolutely, yeah. It makes it that much more difficult to other, doesn't it, when you're actually working around. No, absolutely. Rachel, would you like to say how you might encourage those who are practicing and also educating the next room of practitioners? How do we instill curiosity?
To me, it's about building relationships, isn't it? And having time to get to know your patient, to get to know them, to listen to what they're saying, to not pathologize, not to make assumptions. And that's something that's hard in the current system, isn't it? Because appointments, if you do get one, they're so quick. We don't have the time, do we, to really get to know people. The other thing I'd like to mention is, you know, we hear politicians all the time. Jeremy Hunt's favourite thing was to get waiting lists down, to get people seen, and I think that hides like the reality. You know, you can be seen very quickly, but it's whether you actually access treatment that's important. So if I look back, and my daughter was seen quite quickly, but it was almost 2 years before she got anywhere near treatment. And I think you know, the NHS we need to be much more ambitious about the therapeutic options that are available, and trying new things, and not becoming too obsessed with randomized controlled trials and trying to prove things work and have an evidence base, when, you know, there's all this evidence that other things do work. We're not here because Let's Talk Wellbeing offered us a bit of watered down CBT. We're here because we were able to access, you know, excellent therapy that went beneath that surface injury and into what I describe as like a deep internal wound, and that was healed by the therapy that we were able to access. But, you know, that should be available for everybody.
No, I completely agree, and every human rights are universal, and yet somehow are not so. And I think I echo your point about the politics, and where's the politics, and I do see the personal as political. And I think there is activists in this room, and when you get a chance to see the chat, you will see that how much energy and effort is going into let's get organised, you know. So, you know, when one person runs out of puff, then we support each other. And as my mum would say, we're women. I know there's men here, but as women, think of the things we can do. So
networking is just so important, isn't it? And I think I didn't have a network of friends and people that had been through it back then. You know, I felt very isolated and alone and didn't know anything about mental health, let alone mental health services. So I think it's you know, spreading the word, hopefully through the support network we're setting up, so we can support each other, advocate for each other, point each other in the right direction, and information sharing.
And there's a reason that you felt alone. There's that separation, isn't there, that women are encouraged to think they're alone. And then when you start talking to each other, you realise how many common stories we've got here. And similarly with students, when they start to ask challenging questions, they often feel very isolated, and there's a lot of silencing that can happen softly and pretty nastily. So I mean,
we need to move on from asking. We need to demand. We need to make demands. And if I look back now, if I have to go through stuff again, which, you know, is pretty likely, you know, I'm not going to pussyfoot around asking and waiting. I'm going to make demands, and, you know, if that, whatever it takes. I think that's what I've learned, really, not to be meek, but to make demands. You know, we all, every single one of us, all our loved ones, we all deserve better than this, don't we? And we've seen what happens when you don't get it, and it's utterly, you know, it's devastating, isn't it? I mean, Caroline and Sarah, nobody should have to suffer again like they've suffered.
No, I absolutely agree. And what I'm going to do is, because I did promise people to finish at 6:30, and anyone who knows me knows that that's not my commitment to time. So I am, you know, if okay with you, Claire, what I'll do is I'll give the last word to Caroline Aldridge. What do you see as our place to move forward?
I think that sort of talking about that professional curiosity and everything, and actually what Claire's done, we're aligned in how we view things, and that's why I wrote the book. The book was written, it started off being written purely as an educative tool, and it was only through sharing it with my writing group and other people who said, no, this is for everybody. And actually it's about empathy and reflection. If we're going to get that professional curiosity that needs to happen if change is going to happen, people have got to get in touch with their feelings, the reality. They've got to see people as they really are. They've got to be able to have enough self-awareness to critically reflect on their own actions and not be defensive. So that's really the whole purpose of it. Is it's a whole exercise there, and I challenge anyone, read this and get to the end of it and not be in some way something's made you think, oh, why is that what I do? Does that happen in, you know, in my life? If I've seen this, you know, that it's rich in right across health and social care. There's messages in there for housing, for police, for health, for mental health, for social work, for neighbours, for communities, for friends, for families. So I think we need to be more curious, and we need to get that empathy if we're going to change things. And thinking about each of you that's shared alongside, I've shared Tim's story, but Sarah's shared Connor's. Rachel, you've shared about your daughter. Actually, our children deserve better, and we have, unless they're seen as valuable people who are worth the care they deserve, nothing's going to change. They're not statistics, they're not figures, they're not bloody cases that are hauled around at stations, they're people. And if they've got a mental health problem or a learning disability, or they're homeless, or they're poor, or they're old, or they're sick, they are as valuable as every one of us who is in a fortunate position. So there you go, that's my last word. Let's really start valuing people. And the other last word, because it's always hard to get a last word, is something's gone wrong with my mouse. So I can see there's 99 messages I haven't looked at and loads of things on there. So make sure, Caroline Bald, you don't delete that. And so after this, I can have a look, and everybody, I'm not going to be responding quickly to you. There's 99 plus messages on there, and my phone's been going buzz, 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 buzz for the last hour and a half. So bear with me, but I thank you for everyone's messages, and I am listening, and I just want to stand with you all, really. I want to stand with all those who've lost their Tims, who are trying to keep their Tims alive, who are trying to work with people like Tim, who are trying to design. So I just want to stand with you all. So anyway, I've got to stop now.
No, because I'm going to stop you. You swore. I thought that's.
Oh, did I?
So
actually, well, Sarah Ryan said a ruder word than that.
Gosh, don't keep a secret, eh? So,
the gloves are off now.
Yeah, I know. She's been on Women's Hour, don't you know? So, I mean, thanks ever so much. In the summer, we are talking about doing an event where we besiege Parliament in a positive way, and just ask those questions, because it's continuing this conversation. So I will promise to save the chat. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. I really appreciate all the comments you've made. There's just so much kindness in the room. So thank you. You're more than welcome to switch on your camera and give Almighty Wave whatever you want to do. Oh, hello. I think, oh, there's people there. It's scary, isn't it? So thank you. I mean, you can see, you know, people have been with us for the best part, nearly 2 hours. This is for you, Caroline. Congratulations for getting this out here, and please keep doing what you're doing. Oh, that's my weirdest heart on the planet. There you go. Yeah, it's for you. So congratulations.